Well, welcome everybody to the show here. This is our special CFL pre-show ahead of the BC Lions Saskatchewan Roughriders game. If you're anything like Milt Stegall, who apparently was bored to sleep with the first half of the Edmonton Elks Ottawa REDBLACKS game, maybe this will be more enjoyable here. You can have the game on, watch along with us as we get ready for the BC Lions Saskatchewan Roughriders game here at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Seems really late here. We have Gord Randall joining us here in a minute. I'll pull him on. We had some audio difficulties with StreamYard. We're going to get that all underway. Jim Mullin is going to be joining us, and then we have Andrew Murray as well. People are going to be hopping on and off as the night goes. I'll be riding through until the BC Lions game starts. Taking your calls. If you want to leave comments on the YouTube channel, happy to do it that way. But please call in. I've pinned the call-in link to the top of the chat. So if you want to do that, more than welcome to call in with your comment question. I want to get Gary Stern on here tonight. I've been seeing Gary talking all day, wanting to sell out the Alouettes game tomorrow. Let's get Gary Stern on. Someone tweet at Gary and tell him we want to come on. Gord, do you have your audio? I'm going to bring you on. Give me a thumbs up here. All right, we're going to bring on Gord Randall, analyst at KGN, Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. It's a heater out here on the West Coast, as you well know, but beautiful day for a football game. It's kind of too bad it isn't in Vancouver tonight, but then again, that's always the case when they have to go to Regina. So.
It is. That's why I'm outside. I've been outside most of the summer here on my deck doing the podcasts and live shows and stuff. You know, our house, we don't have air conditioning here in Seattle. But no, it's great. I'm really excited. I have a story I'll tell. We'll get Jim on here too about the impetus of kind of doing this whole live show tonight. But I just thought it was fun. Very rarely do I get a Friday night off to kind of watch this. Jim, are you ready to go? I see Jim looking at the camera. You give me a thumbs up when you're ready, Jim. We'll bring you on. Okay, we're going to bring on Jim Mullin, President of Football Canada. Jim sideways, now right way. Jim, are you in the car? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm at a ferry terminal, and I'm going to beg to differ with Gord on this being a great day for football in BC if it was played out here. I'll tell you what, on the North Shore today and driving around, it's like being inside the old BC place. It is a freaking sauna out here, man. It's beyond close. Like it's tried to open up and rain. There are a couple of thunderclaps over on the North Shore, but man alive! And now I'm jammed in the BC ferry bunker with a one sailing wait. So I know that my
only one sailing is pretty good, Jimbo.
Yeah, well, you know it's Friday. It's the afternoon. Truth be told, I had to get a tow hitch installed on this beautiful truck of mine. And I had to spend the day lounging around and burning time on that. So this is the time when I get back. So you have my apologies, and you have my apologies that I'm probably only going to be on here for 15 minutes, and then I might sneak back in for another 10.
That's okay.
Because data in Canada is crazy. Gord will tell you that. Data in Canada is a bad thing.
Well, it's good. I appreciate it. Yeah, Jim's audio a little subpar from normally we expect with the his broadcast studio microphones. I'll mute him for a second here while we get Gord on. Andrew Murray just texted he's going to be joining closer to 6. That'll be good. Like I said, feel free to call in. I was so excited today. So my wife, her good friend, getting married this weekend. So they were all going to head down and go do the wedding. And so I thought, going to have my first Friday night off. I'm going to crack a beer, going to watch the game, going to do all that. Message yesterday posted on Facebook. The groom stood her up. So the wedding is called off. Dorothy is inside, I think, watching the stream. But so we're still doing all this, but certainly a little bit different circumstances right now than we were expecting. Gord, I had a question for you. We have James Messer here. He's a big listener fan. As a person trying to get into Canadian football, what should I expect from BC tonight? I mean, I would say fireworks, especially after the last couple of weeks, and then we'll get Jim's thoughts on this. But, we haven't had Gord on the podcast yet this season talking CFL. That's why I wanted to get you on tonight as well. But BC has been crazy thus far this season. What have you made of it?
Yeah, I think what you can expect from BC is thus far this season, they've had the best quarterback play in the league, and they've also got the best receiving core in the league. Brian Burnham came back last week, and with him healthy, this is a very star-studded receiving core. So while a lot of the focus has rightfully been on Nathan Rourke and his play so far this year, the two units that have really stood out to me with the Lions' success have been their offensive line, which has spent most of the last decade being much maligned, and the receiving core. The transition, I just see the message from James there at the bottom of the screen, like the transition to Canadian ball, there's a lot more movement. It seems a lot more chaotic, and I totally understand that. But there are some names that you probably would recognize as an American football fan in that Lions receiving core, the top of the list being Lucky Whitehead, who played a number of years for the Dallas Cowboys. So there is a lot of talent in that BC receiving core, and I think that's been one of the kind of under the radar drivers of their success. Rourke's done a great job of getting the ball to these guys, but one of the things that has been a theme throughout the season is Nathan's been not afraid to put the ball into tight windows and ask his receivers to make tough catches, and more often than not, they've made those tough catches. And so I think that's been one of the real drivers of the Lions offense, but you should see some fireworks from that offense. But the great limiting factor too, the mitigating factor, is that the Roughriders, for the first time in a number of weeks, look like they'll have a healthy defensive line this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see tonight how they match up against a much improved BC offensive line. With the likes of Garrett Marino back. I think I've heard that AC Leonard's back as well. Those are a couple big boosts to that defensive line that might be the best in the league when they're all healthy. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch.
Jim, you were big on BC and everything. Your audio, I kind of hear myself here, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about Nathan Rourke, and I might have to kick you off.
Yeah, Nathan Rourke is a guy that, for those who were just getting clued into Canadian football, it's been a long time since we've had a week in, week out a Canadian-born quarterback in this league producing. I dare say it goes back to 1979, 1980, when Jerry DiTilio was with the Montreal Alouettes. So there's that layer to it. But, beyond his passport, what is probably the most important is the curve that he went on during the year off during the pandemic, and then last season to truly develop his game into something different than what we saw at Ohio. And, working with a leading kinesiologist, he addressed his one weakness that was perceived by NFL scouts. And that was his ability to have velocity on his release and attack the seams. He's answered that. My main fear around the BC Lions as a franchise right now is that, we've had a couple of real prodigal years in the history of this team. 1977, the old man will spot 1977 being one of them. Jerry Taggy, a former first-round draft pick of the Green Bay Packers, came in and took a moribund team and just lit them on fire. But there was no real follow-up to that. Doug Flutie came in here in 1990 and then really took off in 1991 and then found his way to the Calgary Stampeders. And then once again, there was a giant drop-off. If I'm Amar Doman, the owner of the BC Lions, I'm going to try my damnedest to ensure that Nathan Rourke is a BC Lion even for just one more year. I'm not sure if he can do that given the money that's in the NFL. But, Nathan Rourke was a guy who was the top rated quarterback who was not awarded UDFA in his draft year. And I think a number of NFL teams have now seen they've missed the boat on this guy. And when that window comes open for him to go south this winter, I think he's gone, unfortunately, from a BC Lions perspective.
Yeah, I had Farhan Lalji on today. We talked a lot about that. I'll meet Jim again. Jim, yeah, the audio, we might have to kick you off here pretty soon. I really appreciate you calling in, though. It's a weird situation this year where Nathan Rourke is on such a sweetheart deal with kind of his rookie contract. They're able to surround him, with the Lucky Whiteheads, Brian Burnham's, kind of pay up for all these guys, Keon Hatcher. And so it'll be really concerning, like what happens at the end of the year. Like, do we need to pay up for Nathan? Are we allowed, do we have the money to pay for all the teams surrounding him? James had a question. ESPN Plus. Yeah, the game's on ESPN Plus tonight. Kind of unfortunate the last couple of Fridays. I know that CFL was getting some decent viewership on ESPN2 when it was doing you in on that. Gord, what do you think of like approaching the end of the season? What does BC do? Take a hard look and figure out what to do with Nathan Rourke.
Well, within the current structures in the league, there's not a whole lot that they can do. There may need to be some adjustments made at the league level to try and help them out, and I have a few suggestions I'll get to in a second. But as currently stands, Rourke is not eligible for an extension off of his rookie contract at this point in time. And even if he was, the type of money that you could give him just isn't going to be enough for any reasonable person to not try their luck in the NFL and see if they can take a shot down there. Even the minimum salaries for somebody who's going to be a third string quarterback in the NFL are going to be on the higher end of CFL salaries. It's something that if he was a 30-year-old quarterback and a veteran in this league, they could maybe have a chance to outstrip. But in his youth, as he is right now, there's structures in place, as there are in most leagues, that kind of hamstring them and limit them from being able to be competitive that way. One of the things that I think the CFL needs to seriously consider, and I mean, you can see that I've got a Lions logo on my head right now, so accuse me of bias as you will, but the reality about Nathan Rourke is not just because of his quality of play, which is thus far this season, this is one of the better halves of quarterback play we've seen in a number of years, but also because of his passport. This is essentially a bit of a unicorn in this league, and this guy has a marketability factor in this country that I think surpasses a lot of what this league's been able to put out in the last couple of decades. And when this kind of opportunity falls into the league's lap, I think they need to potentially do something drastic isn't the right word, but something kind of revolutionary to try and protect this property and see if they can make Nathan Rourke the face of this league for the next number of years. And so there's an idea that I floated on Twitter the other day that I still stand by, that I think is a good idea. And I think that the CFL should be considering creating a salary cap exemption, something along the lines of, if you're an MLS person, something along the lines of the designated player rule, but a salary cap exemption that applies only to Canadian players and or only applies to Canadian quarterbacks. And what that would allow the Lions to do, the league's not necessarily helping the Lions keep him in that they're not helping them pay that salary. But what they are saying is that, hey, Lions, if you look at this guy and you go, this guy is the lifeblood of our franchise right now, he's the best star we've had in decades, we need to pony up every possible dollar we can to keep him here in the CFL. And whatever that number is, they have to pay him $5 million a year, or whatever that number is. The CFL is not going to help the Lions pony up that money, but they are not going to hold that against the salary cap. So the Lions, it's just a matter of money as to whether they're going to pay it, rather than, am I going to sewer the rest of my roster by paying this overinflated salary. So that's something I think the league should really consider. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have to come up with something creative to try and tip the scales in their favor here, because Jim's right. The economics are such and the opportunities are such that, if an NFL opportunity presents itself, which it likely will, he'd kind of be crazy not to follow it through and at least see how it plays out.
It's frustrating. And like I said, I talked with, Farhan today on the podcast, if you guys haven't had a chance to listen to our normal Friday episode yet, but it sets up the CFL. And I know it's always, it's the secondary league. We face this as well with the XFL and the USFL, where it's the show to get to the show. And if the CFL, you have, like you said, this unicorn, this rock star kid that's 24 and comes in, and like, if you can't hold on to him, if it's physically, if the economics don't work out, it's really frustrating. We had one of our listeners, Gary, message me, and he's like, well, like, what could be offered? I go, Gary, like, each CFL team, right? It's like 2 million salary cap, right? Per two I'm like, it's not feasible for them the way it's set up to keep these guys around. It's not. If they want to go to the XFL or the XFL, they want to go to the NFL, and get $100,000, sitting on the practice squad, I think it's like $9,000 a week or whatever for that. I mean, there's just no way to compete with it. It's frustrating. James has, what NFL team would Nathan Rourke go to, and would he actually start minutes? I feel like every team has a quarterback they like. I think a lot of NFL teams don't have quarterbacks they like right now. I certainly don't like my quarterback in Carson Wentz with the Washington football team. I mean, next year is weird because I've been told that the college draft class coming in the NFL, it's the quarterback draft, all that. I mean, Gord, do you realistically see Nathan latching on to any team in the NFL?
Well, latching on, yes. Given a real chance at a starting job, it's tough to say, right? I think if he goes down there, the closest comp I can think of in the last number of years, there's two. Jeff Garcia being one of them, and Doug Flutie being the other one before him. Like, it's not common, though not unprecedented, for a highly touted quarterback to go down there and have his shot. And both those guys I just mentioned eventually got their shots, but neither of them got their shots right away. And so I don't know where his shot is right away. And so it's hard for me to kind of handicap what team would go for him, because I don't think with his pedigree, it doesn't really matter what team he goes to. I don't know that he's going to get a shot right away off the bat. So any team in the league could take a liking to him and bring him in. You know, like, I mean, people wouldn't even think this in a million years in this conversation if they're just thinking about next year. But the Tampa Bay Bucks are a good example, right? If he's not a guy that you're bringing in to start right away, well, yeah, you have Tom Brady, but you also have 45-year-old Tom Brady, who's on a year-to-year basis, right? So there's lots of possibilities that are opened up when you consider that it's likely a multiple-year approach for an NFL team that I think takes the right liking to him. Now, if you want a short-term solution, a team that might be the best fit if it were tomorrow, I mean, you don't have to look far down the road from you and I. Seattle Seahawks were an absolute dumpster fire last night on offense. You know, Drew Lock looked like he may have been having some momentum in that race, and then he came down with COVID. You know, Geno Smith is Geno Smith. I don't. It's weird in the year 2022 that we still have to say this, but Geno Smith is Geno Smith. But the problem is that this is a Pete Carroll team, which means that some way, somehow, they'll find a way to scrape out 5 or 6 wins and make sure that they're not in a position to draft a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. And now they'll have to be figuring out something creative to come up with their quarterback solution, because that's just the way they always put themselves. You know, they got lucky with Russell Wilson in the 3rd round 12 years ago, right? But yeah, I mean, that to me is the one that kind of stands out the most right now. But you never know. Like, let's look at how this season plays out. You know, Trey Lance could go down in flames in San Francisco, even though they think that he's the next big thing. You know, the 4-headed monster of whatever rabble the Carolina Panthers are bringing in, you know, Baker Mayfield, I think Darnold might still be there. Or did they get rid of him? I don't even know. Does it really matter? You know, Carson Wentz is like, I liked Carson Wentz coming out of college, but let's face it, at this point in time, like, Carson Wentz is not good. Right. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities of places that could potentially open up its opportunities there. But yeah, you never know. I will say though, like, and I have kind of made some comments to Farhan and some of the other people talking about this. I'm getting pretty tired, given that it's only August, of the constant talk about how Nathan Rourke is leaving. We have half a season left. He's not even eligible to leave until December. And all anybody wants to talk about with the largest, most high-profile, high-potential star that this market's had in decades is that he's going to leave. That's all people want to talk about. And it's like, can we actually, if we claim to be football people, can we actually stop and watch the football for a while and maybe enjoy the ride for a change, instead of just hand-wringing about when this person's going to leave? Like, it just, I find that a little bit frustrating that that's what we're focusing on. But it is an inevitable reality. It's just something I just don't really want to waste a lot of energy and oxygen on for the next couple months.
We have a debate. We'll bring Jim back. Jim, I'll give you one more chance here. Audio was really rough before. We have a debate going in the chat, you know, and people not realizing, you know, the CFL salary cap, Mac the Knife, per Google, CFL salary cap presently 5.35 million Canadian. So that's, you know, 3 and change going. It's just, it's not you can't compete with that. Let's bring Jim in again. We're going to give Jim one more shot here. He's in the ferry. Jim, anything to add more to the Nathan Rourke discussion?
Yeah, it is a bit of a bittersweet thing watching Nathan Rourke develop on the curve that he is. And further to Gord's point, yeah.
Jim, Jim, it's too rough. I'm sorry, man.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
It was my phone's actually overheating. So
it's okay.
Godspeed. That's got something to do with it.
Okay. Godspeed. Wow, that was scary there. I was like, what is happening?
Straight from the third moon of Endor.
If anyone else wants to call in, Andrew, like I said, Murray's going to be joining us here in a few minutes. He's getting off of work. You know, happy to take some XFL, USFL talk as well in the news, you know, with them looking for investors and all that stuff. Attendance at games, Philip wants to know, you know, Kyle, longtime friend, Montreal is almost sold out tomorrow. Well, that's almost sold out per Gary Stern. I mean, Gary Stern said a couple weeks ago it was going to be sold out. It wasn't. I guess, Gord, what do you make of that, first of all? I've been trying to get Gary on the call in all day. What do you make of Gary Stern running amok on Twitter here the last better part of a month now.
I mean, I don't think there's a downside to it. It's nice to see a couple of new big personalities in these executive groups in Gary Stern and Victor Sui over in Edmonton. Both of them quite active on social media. Both of them doing their best to promote their franchises. Amar Doman has taken a different tact here in BC. He hasn't been as active directly on social media, but you've seen that what the organization is putting out has been better than it was in years past, like markedly, and that he's been quite visible, in the dressing room after games and on the sidelines and stuff like that. So it is. I have found it actually a big breath of fresh air to see those three personalities in general jumping into this league with some enthusiasm, with some attitude, not bad attitude, but with some attitude, and wanting to be kind of in your face promoters of the game more so than a lot of the powers that be have been in this league in years past. And those kinds of things sell the league. Like, think of the ownership groups, the owners that of from other leagues, and they're the ones that are bombastic, that show you some of their personality, the Mark Cubans of the world. And so I think there's no downside to a guy like Gary Stern running around and saying whatever it is that he wants to say to try and promote his club. Victor Sui going out and proclaiming victories. I think Gary Stern's done the same thing, and it doesn't really matter if they're right or wrong, because they're drawing attention to what they're doing just by making that prediction, right? So I really like the approach that they're taking, and hopefully Gary takes you up on that offer. But they should be able to sell out that stadium in Montreal at the right time of year. People aren't quite back to work yet, but it's getting close to that. So summer holidays are starting to wind down, and that's not a super big stadium. I think the capacity there at Molson is only about 25,000. So that should be something that's doable. The biggest thing is that the on-field product's got to kind of keep up, because as we've seen here in BC, like, it's a slow bounce back from a team that's been kind of a cellar dweller for the last number of years, and things are surging forward, but it doesn't get fixed overnight.
Yeah, we need to get. So I recently discovered that Amar Doman has an Instagram, so that's good. I'm not the biggest Instagram guy. We need to get Amar Doman on Twitter. We need to get him on there. I think just for the fan interaction, I think CFL social media lives on Twitter. I mean, obviously there's really strong Facebook groups, CFL chatter that I'm part of with Todd and the guys over there. But I think you need to have him on Twitter, retweeting a little bit, interacting that way, getting it up. I just think that it would be, I don't know. I think Amar, and he was on our show. Obviously, we had an extended sit down, but I think kind of lowering the curtain like just a little bit. I think Gary might be too much feet in. Gary might be like head over heels in the pool, but I think just showing a little bit of that, I think, is good. I like seeing Amar address the team, at the end of the game. Was it last week? The big victory that way. We're having a lot of chatter about the horns in Montreal. I do think that was not a great look for the CFL. Do you have any takes on the Alouettes horns, the fans that were in attendance last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally maybe the TV broadcast could find some way to filter that sound out, and I'm not gonna dump on TSN, given that there was no way for them to predict that. But now that they've seen that in action, maybe there's something that their sound engineers could work on to maybe make that less of an issue for the TV audience at home. But I got to say, like, in the stadium itself, it's a great atmosphere when you have that, right? And as much as us fans watching it on TV maybe found it annoying at home, well, imagine what the opposing team found it like to be on the road in that stadium and dealing with that stuff, right? And you look down to, look at college football in the States and some of the places where, like Mississippi State. What are they known for? Cowbells. And you watch it on TV, and because the broadcasters prepared for it, they make it manageable so that that it's there on TV, but that's not all that you hear, right? But at the same time, in the stadium itself, it is an experience to be part of that, right? It's deafening. So I don't have a problem with the horn thing. I think the TV broadcast is going to have to kind of adjust to it and make it so that it's not as abrasive for the listener at home, the viewer at home. But I don't have a problem with it. I mean, you think back to the World Cup in South Africa in 2010 or whatever year that was, when the what the heck were those horns called that everybody became obsessed with after that World Cup? It's part of the fan experience, and whatever they can do to make some noise, then let them make some noise, especially in an outdoor stadium.
I don't like it. I disagree. James says here, I was trying to my 3 CFL game, trying to watch last week. All I could think of. That's what I thought. I guess it was 2 weeks ago, right? Because it was the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I was turning that on. I was flipping back and forth. I don't normally have like a Thursday off to watch that. And I did think like, if you're someone new trying to watch this, this is a horrible look. Like I thought it felt very, I know, Rod Peterson, friend of the show, sometimes calls the CFL like State Farm football. It felt very, and I know like Hodge wrote the article like, well, anything is good and anything we're talking about. I'm like, I don't think it's good. I don't think you want to be focusing on that. It didn't feel like a good look to me. Kyle is a lot in the chat. I want Kyle to call in. I've mailed Kyle a bunch of merch over this time. I want some people to call in. Gord's going to hop off here pretty soon. I know he has to go. We're going to get Andrew Murray in here, but I want to talk to some fans as well. Mark Brendan says Gary is the man. I don't know. I think the manual horns is fine, but that was the prevalent. I just didn't think it was a good look kind of watching it. Any other thoughts on that, Gord?
Yeah, I mean, I agree to disagree on it. I guess I don't really have a big problem with it, but I do agree with the sentiment that it was dominant on the TV broadcast, and it did get to the point where it was kind of distracting for the viewers at home, and so I understand that sentiment. So that's something that I think if the broadcasting partner can't figure out a way to make that a little bit more palatable for the audience at home, then maybe it is something that they have to address. But I have no problem with it. I mean, one of the things that you see, whatever the noisemakers that they give out are, whether they're those inflatable clapper sticks or the little hand clicker things or cowbells, air horns, whatever. The biggest thing for it is that the audience loves engaging with those things. And that's really at the end of the day, like that's what you're trying to do as a hometown, putting on a game event is give the fans something that they enjoy doing and that they want to come back to, especially the kids, right? So noisemakers, as cheap as they may seem, noisemakers are a nice way to do that.
We got, obviously the game's going on right now. Edmonton's up 16-12 against Ottawa. Rough first half. Taylor Cornelius, I think they said he was 0 for 7 when I turned on the game. Was not a great outing. What is going on in Edmonton under Chris Jones's helm right now?
I mean, I'm not surprised for a couple of reasons. I'm not surprised first and foremost that like the Elks were really bad last year. Like really bad last year. And, they brought in a couple of talented players, names that CFL fans would know, guys like bringing James Wilder back and stuff like that. But, it's the combination of them having a talent deficient roster to begin with, and then bringing in Chris Jones, who kind of insists on being the mad scientist at the CFL, the guy that knows better than everybody else, for better or for worse. And he starts doing things like bringing, Jerron Carter out of mothballs to play DB. And you just, I don't know. Like I've never been a big Chris Jones fan, especially after his whole bailing on the CFL to go coach high school in Tennessee, talking about that as if it's his dream job, and then coming back after a year and bailing on the high school in Tennessee. Like I think about those high school kids, and they were probably devastated by that. And I have a tough time shaking that off. I find that to be a very low character move. And so for him to be brought into Edmonton and be given the keys to the car, no questions asked, was something that kind of raised red flags for me from the very beginning. Like it kind of read as a desperate move to me. And I'm happy for people to rip on me and say that I'm being unfair, and fair enough. Maybe I am being unfair to Chris Jones, but I am not surprised that it's not necessarily worked out the greatest. They didn't have a great quarterback plan from the outset. If you remember, actually, the big news they made with the quarterback position in the offseason was they signed JT Barrett, the ex-Ohio State star, and he was going to come into camp, and that was a name that people kind of raised their eyebrows about, and then he decided that it wasn't right for me. I think he suffered an injury and decided to retire, and then they were left kind of scrambling and picking up the scraps. Nick Arbuckle is a fringe starter in this league, and that was the guy they had to kind of lean on. And then Taylor Cornelius is an unproven guy in this league, and that was the guy they kind of had to lean on. I absolutely love Trey Ford. I think he's got a ton of potential, but for him to be seeing real field action in week 2 in the CFL as a quarterback was not anybody's plan for that guy going into the CFL. So, I think that it's you're in this tough situation now, right? Where, there are going to be calls for a guy like Trey Ford. Hey, like, might as well give him some reps. But if your season's swirling the drain and you're just giving this guy reps behind a not great offensive line that's had a bunch of injuries and things, and with a team that's often losing and chasing points, that's not necessarily going to be great for him in the long run either. So, yeah, I don't know. One of the things that I think is really unfortunate is that since the Elks rightfully rebranded, and in my opinion did a pretty good job with it, the team has been crappy, so it hasn't been great for the PR surrounding that rebrand. And I know I've heard a couple of voices in Edmonton that are kind of like, well, I miss when we weren't the Elks. And it's, it has nothing to do with the name. It has everything to do with the fact that teams just happen to be bad since that happened. But that's been one of the unfortunate side effects of the last couple seasons for them.
We're going to bring in Andrew Murray here. By God, there's Andrew Murray's music. But speaking of the Elks, I didn't realize. So yesterday I saw a Dave Campbell tweet that, James Wilder out for the season, potentially career-ending injury. I mean, just horrendous there.
Yeah.
Friend of the show. I love James and the work he does with youth and camps and obviously on the field and off. I mean, just tremendous loss. Andy, how are you doing here? Thank you for hopping on the Colin Show.
I'm just coming off the rope like usual. And speaking of the Elks, they just took a double-digit lead against Ottawa. They are up 22-12 with the extra point pending. So a bit of a bounce back. But I kind of heard what Randall was talking about, sort of the trials and tribulations with their season. And yeah, the James Wilder news is just, it's horrendous. It's unfortunate. I feel for him. He's been on your show. He's a great guy. He sounds like a really great, charismatic individual, a guy that you want to have in the CFL to not only advertise his own skill set, but advertise the best parts of the league. And I think that's just so unfortunate. Neck injuries are something that you do not play around with. So we'll see what his long-term future plans are. But for the short term, that really hurts the Elks. Obviously, their running game is going to be set back. Even he's a factor in the passing game too. I mean, he's a multi-use weapon that really hurts them. Whatever quarterback is back under center is able to throw to him or anyone else. I mean, that's unfortunate, but for the time being, they're up in Ottawa, which is just buck wild to me considering what kind of season Ottawa is having, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, not good looking great for Edmonton in the long term.
Yeah, Gord, I saw James is saying here, Edmonton Elks have never won at home, but Edmonton hasn't won at home since 2019, right? Because obviously there was the lost season in 2020, didn't win at home last year, haven't won at home this year. I mean, it's going on 3 years now of not having a home. Edmonton, like I just couldn't imagine. Ottawa has been just as poor. They have managed somehow to keep their attendance, somewhat stable, but with Edmonton, crazy to think of the streak that they've gone on without winning at home.
Yeah, there's not much to be said about it. Like I think it's a span of something like 16 or 17 home games now. Like that's pretty rough. And Edmonton's a great CFL market. It's arguably the most storied CFL franchise. Commonwealth Stadium is a venerable stadium, but it's still a very good fan experience, especially in the summer. As much as I'm a West Coast guy and the Elks are one of our rival teams and always have been, like I'm hopeful that they kind of get back into the right lane and can piece it together. And you talk about Ottawa. Ottawa's done such a fantastic job since the reboot of this Red Blacks franchise. The third time they've the third different franchise that they've had in Ottawa. But they've done a phenomenal job with the venue there at Lansdowne. They've done a great job of building the entertainment complex around it, making it one of the best fan experiences in the league. And that's another franchise that I hope kind of figures it out sooner or later. I've always been a fan of Paul LaPolice as a person and as a football mind. But there are some real questions that arise here because this is his second time getting a head coaching gig, and this is the second time it hasn't exactly gone swimmingly. But there's also some mitigating factors for him, some really, really major ones, not the least of which is Jeremiah Masoli's injury after that dirty hit from Garrett Marino. Now, I don't think that the Red Blacks would have been a much better team than they are now with Jeremiah Masoli. I still think that they were kind of talent deficient in a lot of areas. They basically have one reliable receiver and nobody else has proven to be any kind of a factor whatsoever. That's tough to survive with in this league. But that's a pretty big mitigating circumstance in the CFL. Your franchise quarterback gets knocked out for the season in week 4. There's a lot of coaches that can hang their hat on that and say, look, this is way out of my control. But here's the interesting thing with the East, though, right? Somebody said, I saw somebody on social media when the Red Blacks had a fleeting lead earlier in this game, saying, "Hey, they win tonight and they're 3 games out of first place." Like that's the way the CFL East is right now. So nobody's quite out of it, but they're going to have to piece together a comeback against the Elks here, or they're done. The Elks, frankly, the way the West is looking right now, the Elks are probably already a lost cause, unless the Roughriders completely fall apart down the stretch. I just don't see that happening. So, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Ottawa, for the latter half of the season and then in the off season, because they've got some work to do. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's hard. You're talking about, and I want to get Andy's thoughts on this too. Like, we just watched the whole USFL season, right? Pretty good gameplay right across the board. I mean, quarterback to the CFL is kind of its own story, right? It takes a couple years for them to really latch on. But, we had good receivers. We had good talent in the league. Like, I'm just curious, when you're a CFL head coach, like Gord's saying, and, Ottawa doesn't have receivers or people don't have, like, are we not doing enough scouting down south? Are we not looking for that? I mean, it certainly feels like with the XFL coming, running showcases, like there's enough talent out here. I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is the excuse from like a CFL, scout or head coach to like not have a qualified wide receiver room, no matter what the quarterback is.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of at least what's going on with, are you saying in terms of Ottawa, like what's going on? Well,
just in general. I mean, we talk here. There's enough talent for 18 different spring football leagues, but yet we're talking how CFL doesn't have enough guys to field, to be able to get a good team on.
Well, I mean, that's something I've wondered about myself. Now, look, I will admit, I'm not as entrenched in the developments in terms of Canadian talent at the university level, or in terms of like the camp structure and all that. I know it's geared towards the Canadian game, but it seems like, Farhan was on your show this morning, and he said that most people grow up trying to play in the NFL. They want to play the 4-down game. They don't want to stay around in Canada for too long. And if they do, they want to use it as a springboard to be able to get somewhere else. That's clearly going to be the case with Nathan Rourke. I mean, Rourke is having a historically fantastic season, but he's still looking to possibly go to the NFL. Like that's just the fact of the matter. That's going to happen. And unless, as he was explaining too, unless you're a veteran and that you're suited to the Canadian game and you don't have much of a chance in a camp down south, then yes, you're going to stay. But I mean, I think it's going to be a case where I think American talent is just not going to be as available. It's not going to be as ubiquitous in the future because they're going to be choosing to stay down south. They're going to be staying in the great 48, and they're going to be down there instead of coming up north. And then what happens to the Canadian players who decide to stay up north? I mean, Edmonton should be thanking the lucky stars that Trey Ford decided he was going to stay in the CFL. He could have just been running around camps this entire August and decided not to actually pursue the CFL whatsoever. And it's unfortunate for him that he got hurt. But the fact of the matter is he did choose the CFL over pursuing camp opportunities instead. So, they're just going to have to hope that people break that way. But in terms of acquiring talent, I just wonder if maybe there's a way that they can convince the youth that it's a good idea to stick around in Canada, or at least that there's more meaning to it or more purpose or whatever way of strategy that they're going to pitch it. But it just seems to me that no matter what, there seems to be just more viable options in going into the States right now, as far as opportunities, as far as maybe cost efficiency, maybe in terms of economic scale, what have you. There just seems to be more of a draw down there than there is in Canada right now.
Gord,
can I jump in with a couple things, Reed?
I was going to toss to you. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. First thing I wanted to jump in with is, Nathan Rourke's a perfect example in what you're seeing with a lot of the top Canadian talent these days. And that Nathan Rourke's been American since he was 17 years old, right? Like he went down to, believe it was either Kansas or I think he went to Alabama for prep school and then Kansas for JUCO. And then he went to the University of Ohio. Like he's fully committed to being here and being this guy. He considers himself Canadian. That's not something I'm questioning in the slightest, but I am saying he's more than comfortable in the United States, in the U.S. football community, playing the American game. In fact, he's played more of that than he has played the Canadian game. And so that's something that also works in the CFL's favor. When you talk about these spring leagues that are doing the skill development, the camp circuits, all those kinds of high performance things. The reality is that the vast majority of them, even in this country, those guys are playing the American version of the game. And I am never going to be the person that advocates for the CFL to move away from the Canadian set of rules, but it is a reality, a kind of a complicating factor for them, is that even for Canadian youth these days, the vast majority of them are getting exposed to the American game as much as the Canadian game, if not more. And so that's something that the CFL kind of fights an uphill battle with, because there's economic realities about kids wanting to go to the NFL. There's the glory reality of it, that the NFL is the NFL. This isn't the 1980s anymore when the CFL is just a different brand than the NFL. This is the 2020s where the NFL is this megalith, and everybody else is the subjects underneath them. The third estate, so to speak. So, those things kind of work in the against the CFL's favor for keeping these guys. But, Trey Ford's a good example of a guy that has a different story. He's still going to explore opportunities in the States, but he's not necessarily married to the States because he's been Canadian all the way through his development. He's played Canadian ball, and that may be something that's just a little bit more of a comfort factor for him. So, there aren't easy answers for it. I think the easiest answer for it is that you continue to create structures where, Canadian players are well rewarded for staying at home and representing teams as Canadian players. That has historically worked pretty well for them for the most part. And I think if you keep up that kind of structure, then you keep up that kind of structure and it helps. But, the reality of the 2020s is that you're never going to get back to a place. If you're at the CFL, you're never going to get back to a place where you're going to compete with the NFL talent for talent. The revenue streams are just never going to be close. So you've got to find a way, and this kind of brings me full circle back to my argument about Nathan Rourke and the salary cap extension. If you get a guy like that, you need to sink your feelers into him as much as possible and go, I don't care if the other 8 teams that don't have him have a problem with this. We absolutely need this guy to be the transcendent superstar for our league so that this league can be marketable and viable. And we need to figure out ways to keep him while not upsetting the competitive balance too much.
Well, I think right now, especially where, like you said, and Andy said, you have Trey Ford, opting, and because I think they wanted to use him more as a receiver, right, in Buffalo. That's where that kind of first camp he went to. But, like Trey Ford deciding, Nathan Rourke right now, we're coming off of, the craziness and the offseason and the XFL and everything. We've got the new CBA. Like, I just think, we have invested owners now. It just feels like there's a lot of headwind and a good, not negative headwind, like a good wind going for the CFL right now. But let's figure out, like Gord said, changing, adding that exception to the salary cap, kind of working around. Do you not think that Amar would, he's subsidizing drinks at the stadium? Do you not think Amar Doman would let's help subsidize part of the salary of Nathan Rourke so we can keep this guy around? I just think it's a really pivotal time. It's really interesting. I mean, I'm really glad to be a part of this discussion now in at least a somewhat educated way. I mean, obviously not over the legacy of the CFL, but Andy, any other thoughts on that?
No, I would agree with you. It's been a crash course for me too, Reed. I'm right there with you. It's been a really interesting last 2 years as far as learning the CFL game. It's been really interesting. But no, I guess my other point is just, in terms of creating, again, enticing options for people to stay in the game and to stay in Canada is really a big deal. And I'm glad that Gord Randall mentioned about the whole thing about Trey Ford, as far as he stayed in the Canadian game. He's comfortable with it. That's where he grew up. And I'm not sure if that's the case for a lot of youth growing up in Canada. So that's the thing. If you can be able to persuade people that that's maybe not the better option, but it's a viable option, then I think that's really going to help the case of the league going forward. But again, you're not going to have guys for example, Calgary. I remember watching the Young Rock show on Peacock on NBC, and he's talking about he's going to the Calgary Stampeders, and they have Doug Flutie who's starting and Jeff Garcia who's the backup. 2 Pro Bowl quarterbacks in the same QB room. You're not going to see that anymore. That's just not a reality. That's just not something that's going to be transpiring in the near future in the CFL, that kind of ubiquitous amount of talent. And that was signaled when Russell Wilson became a star and Kyler Murray got drafted number 1 overall. The NFL said, we're okay with short quarterbacks now. This is fine. And other kinds of athletic profiles that basically changed the narrative. And so that kind of wealth of talent is going to be harder to come by, and it's going to have to come through hard scouting, hard preparation, and hard just recruitment in these certain areas that the CFL is going to have to focus on.
Gordon,
Andy, you're bang on with that point, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a history lesson. But that's always been the CFL's wheelhouse. You just look at the quarterback position historically. That's always been where the CFL has been able to mine their stars, and that's always going to be the lifeline of this league, is being able to scout guys that somehow fall through the cracks of the NFL's net. And this goes back to the 1980s when Warren Moon was a superstar in this league because the NFL wasn't big on black quarterbacks in the 80s. You get into the 90s, and those guys you were talking about, Doug Flutie, he had a great college career. Everybody remembers his miracle throw at Boston College. That was a fantastic team, but he was whatever he was, 5'9". He was well under 6 feet tall, and the NFL didn't want to touch that. And the reality is the NFL didn't want to touch that for a long time. He didn't go back down to the NFL until he was in his 30s. He had a lengthy career up here before going down. Jeff Garcia comes from a small school, same thing, guy that kind of slips through the cracks. And there's some other guys that never did make it back stateside that were stars in this league that fit the same mold. Anthony Calvillo, Utah State, slipped through the cracks. Ricky Ray, I think he was Portland State or Sac State or something like that. He slipped through the cracks, right? If you're the CFL, Bo Levi Mitchell, Eastern Washington, slips through the cracks, right? Those kinds of guys are the guys that you're going to have to live through. And the one guy, this take could age very poorly, but the one guy that I loved watching in college that we just saw emerge a little bit last week in Hamilton, Jamie Newman, also screams to me as another slip through the cracks guy. Very athletic guy, played at a good school at Wake Forest, had a limited career resume, was really only one big year down there, and he didn't quite catch on in the NFL. Maybe that's the kind of guy that falls into that mold. But whether they're Canadian or not, the CFL is going to have to continue to excel in finding guys that slip through the cracks. And that gets harder and harder for them every year as the NFL gets bigger and bigger. But that's going to have to continue to be their bread and butter if they're going to survive.
Well, and it's going to, Philip's asking the question, do you think the XFL and USFL will find that? I had no idea Bo Levi went to Eastern. I had no idea about that. I know Vernon Adams and all that. And I had no idea. That's remarkable. It is going to become more challenging too, if USFL and XFL, in some regards, stick around. I had Dave Naylor on back months ago. I can't remember. If you like Dave Naylor, I might tune in next week as well to the show. But, talking is XFL and USFL going to affect the CFL next year? Absolutely not. But 2, 3, 4 years down the line, if any of these spring football leagues exist, stick around. The amount, you just less guys and less guys that you can scout, like Gordon's saying, trying to find those special guys to bring them up. You're going to have, the XFL is pumping millions of dollars into player scouting. We're running showcases all around the country. We're paying all these scouts to fly around. We're attending the NFL camps to get the guys that drop off. Them being in the States puts them at the advantage over the CFL and being able to attend. That CJ Kavaz or whatever, where the XFL, he's at a different NFL training camp every weekend right now, trying to figure out what's going on. I do think it's going to be interesting, year 2 of the XFL, year 3, what happens with the CFL. Andy,
yeah, I agree. Agreed. I think the prevailing attitude up here whenever those concepts come up is, whoop-de-doo, let's see if it lasts, right? And most of the time we're right in questioning whether it's going to last. Now, the XFL, I'll give credit because, the pandemic threw it into disruption. It looked like it had a little bit more staying power, and they're in a good position to come back and make another run at it. But it's hard to assess what the effect of those leagues is going to be on the CFL until those leagues have the longevity to actually have that multiple year effect that you just talked about on the CFL. So I don't want to go too far into speculating what that's going to look like, because the reality is that since the 1980s, it's really only been, in terms of leagues with staying power and longevity, it's really only been the CFL and the NFL since the original USFL folded. So it's hard for me to speculate too much on what that effect's going to be. But I got to take off. Enjoy the game, guys. And I really enjoyed this. Thanks for having me, Reed.
Gore, we appreciate it at Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. Thanks to us. We got Jim on a little bit, but that was a little bit of a failure. So I appreciate it.
I picked up the slack for Jimbo. I gave you extra time than I planned on Jimbo's behalf. So there you go.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Gord. Have a good night.
Yeah, no worries. You too, guys. See ya.
So Andy and I are going to ride here a little bit. I want to talk a little USFL, a little XFL. So I would love somebody to call in. We have all these great, we have Kyle's in the chat, Philip's in the chat, Jenna was in the chat. I would love people to call in. This is a call-in show. I'm happy to read comments and talk to you, Andy, all day, but I would like that. we're talking about, Rourke, pay stuff. So that what is interesting you most right now? I haven't had you on since the Arlington Hub announcement XFL show that we did in the world. It could be CFL, USFL, XFL. What is the most interesting storyline to you right now?
So I want to pick up on what Gord Randall was finishing off on, which was the viability of the leagues and where they go going forward. So we have three things going on simultaneously. We have obviously the CFL brand and what it's trying to do in terms of its longevity and continuing to do what it needs to do to continue operating. We have the USFL, which is going on about, hey, look at all these people who are getting signed into camp. Now, we don't know the final results of how many people stick in camp, but we will find that out in the coming weeks. And then we have the XFL, who's coming in with their own brand, their own style. And I think it's interesting. We've picked up on this a little bit in terms of, for example, Anthony Becht coming out, and who you talked to at the Arizona showcase, and said, basically was forward and saying, look, if all of my guys went off to the NFL the next year, that's fine. I want all the guys to get their opportunities and go on to the next league. Now, that is, in terms of notoriety, that's fantastic. If you get that many guys to stay and stick and actually be stars, that's fantastic. I think what these leagues have to also realize, though, is that they can't just be namesakes as far as, oh, look who we got in the league. They also have to be economically supportive of themselves. They have to be able to. NFL Europe is a perfect example. Listen, they had guys like Jake Delhomme, Adam Vinatieri, Kurt Warner, multiple players get in from that side of the world and played in a different country or different countries and be able to come back and get their footing into the NFL. But they eventually folded because the NFL wanted to start expanding into Europe, and they figured that was no longer a viable option for them economically. There was no point in supporting that. Let's continue going on to, let's try and get games in London, games in Germany, games in Mexico, and so on and so on. And I just wonder, as far as like all of these leagues are concerned, is not just being able to puff out their chest and be like, hey, look how many players we have in the upper league. Are you able to sustain your model and be able to be economically proficient? Like, can you be the MLS? Can you be the MLS and know that even though your product is not the top end deal of everything, that you are still supported and you're still cheered on by fans, supported by media outlets, supported by multiple avenues of revenue to be able to continue your model? That's really the biggest thing for me. And that's something I've thought about a lot recently, because obviously we're in three different parts of this discussion with all three of these leagues.
Well, it's the thing, it's the famous Arash Madani question, from our duel last year was like, so if the XFL is just, or the USFL, but at the time it was the XFL, if the XFL is just the show that you watch players on to get to the show, is that enough to sustain interest? And we don't really know. I mean, I think USFL this year discovered there's a base of about 1 million people that'll watch every week. Pretty good football, and people in the stands be damned, and kind of that whole mess we don't need to get into. But like, I think there's a baseline number. I don't know what the growth potential of that is, right? I don't know what Danny and The Rock and Redbird's numbers are telling them. What struck me, recording yesterday and kind of figuring out this week is just how much money the XFL is spending right now, is planning to spend and I've said, I was the guy that said the USFL, we're too frugal. We need to pony up. We need to do all this. I'm like looking the other way at the XFL and saying like, guys, I don't know if we need 2 social media managers for each team right now. I don't know if we need 2 local directors like running the event. I don't know if we need that. I mean, it's remarkable. And maybe they don't fill all those, you can post job listings and not, fill them all, but it is remarkable to be how many job listings they have right now and how much money they're willing to spend year one, having not even kicked off yet.
Yeah, they've kind of shown an indication that they were willing to put in that capital, right? Like having director of player personnels, having social media managers, having medical professionals, all kinds of different people involved in the league, and all kinds of different hands on deck. They weren't trying to cookie cutter get people to do 2 jobs at the same time. They want to be able to have distinct positions filled in every sector. Now, again, that's great. Can you continue to keep it sustainable throughout that period? And is it going to add up in the long run? And again, this has to be a long-term proposition. And I think that's the tough part for, the XFL and the USFL is they're just starting presumably just starting this long-term run that they want to go on. Whereas the CFL, again, has already said, well, we've been on this long-term run. We know what it's like, which they do, but the landscape is also changing. So it's kind of, it feels like a chicken and an egg question where it's just like, well, which one's going to really go first, or which one's going to come forward first? Is it going to be, is it the old architecture that's crumbling, that's not really going to be able to sustain and be able to keep in place? Or is it this new foundation that you're building? Is it going to be able to stand up and be able to hold up on its own? That's kind of, we're caught in the middle, honestly, between both. And who knows, maybe all three survive. I don't know. That would be pretty wild. But if all three were able to sustain themselves and survive, I mean, good for all of us. It's more entertainment and it's great. But, I go back. There's one other thing I want to mention. I've talked about this a little bit to people who obviously don't follow spring football like us, or at least not as religiously. And one of the comments I've gotten, especially from the NFL preseason games that have been going on, is they've said to me, just by watching those games, that they see a different speed element. They just see a different pace that the game is being played. Just preseason. These are third stringers. These are second and third stringers and fourth stringers who are playing this game. And it seems faster than some of the games that they watched in the USFL. That's what I've heard commentary from a couple of people, and I find that very interesting. So again, is it the idea of, can you convince people to watch this? I don't want to say lesser product, because I think that's derogatory, but at least in the sense of like this sense of like, these players are still trying to make it. They're not going to be in the show again. This is a different show, not the one that you're used to. So I guess it's the sense of, can you convince people to do that?
I see Van. We're going to bring on Van here in just a second. I worry, and all season, and I know I was just as guilty of everyone with the USFL stuff, and ratings would come out or attendance, and we would go, oh my God, like that, that's too low, or that's not. And Fox, and they said like, we're fine, this is all, and I don't know, I think it was below what they expected, but the expectations were so. If the XFL doesn't have sold out stands like every week and a billion Twitter followers and like all this, I'm like, with the amount of energy, legwork, people hiring, all this stuff that's going in that, like, I mean, their floor is much, much higher than what the USFL needs to be to kind of be like, see all the work we're doing, like this really all panned out. Let's bring in Van, number one Dragons fan here. Van's got his nice hat and shirt on. Van, how are you doing? You look like you're sleeping.
No, just kind of chilling, listening to you guys talk. I've been following all the Big Ten news over the last few days, and in the interview, the Big Ten commissioner kind of alluded to the fact that he might actually do revenue sharing with players in the not too distant future. That was a huge increase, and that all came from Fox, basically, that new contract. So Fox is seeing the potential for all this media, having this content, and I'm sure the Big Ten is probably multiple sports year round. But if they're willing to step up to $1.5 billion on an annual basis, that tells me that there's advertisers, there's broadcasters out there, they're willing to pony up for quality content, that the consumers want to watch. And you look at all these media rights deals that you're seeing leaked around right now, and I think that Redbird's got their hand on the pulse and has a good idea of where that little ceiling is for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't think they're going to overspend getting there.
So then you look at the USFL, why weren't ratings off the charts for the USFL?
Well, look at the local engagement. You and I are both here in the Western Washington market. And I rarely saw anything from Fox 13, which is a Fox-owned station, saying anything about it. I never saw anything on King 5, the NBC affiliate. Did you see anything like that?
Now, and I will be happy that I correctly predicted that as someone that I was a Fox employee for years, back when Tribune owned them. Now Q13 is, I believe they're an O&O now. I think Fox owns them, but I said that when Paul was on the show, I said, if they're relying on like Q13 running spots in Seattle, trying to build, fan interest here, I don't, well, and it wouldn't be here though, right, man? I mean, because this is Seattle. But I mean, are you saying because...
Right, but what I'm getting at though is it's a full, like you said, it's an owner-operator set. They can say, hey, we need to dedicate 1% of our primetime 30 seconds or 15-second ads, or we need to run a banner They had lots of opportunities to embrace the market, and they didn't do it. But it was an incubator season. They fully stated that. I think you'll see a much different product and a much more robust attempt at fan engagement nationwide this coming season.
I want to get Andy's thoughts. And I've talked to a couple of the interviews lately we've had, like leading into the USFL this year. XFL has so many tentpole events coming up. We have the nicknames and the uniforms and the draft and the kickoff. Like, is a bigger marketing push USFL? We have a second hub. Like, is that enough to like kind of give them the heartbeat? Like, okay, we're shocking. We're bumping back up here for next season. What do you think?
I mean, that would be a start, I think, just to be able to get the name out there or just get some more recognition. But I think to Van's point about, in terms of like the local Fox station sponsorship, I mean, what point was there for anyone to do that out here in my state, California, state of 40 million people? Was there any point of doing that any way, shape, or form? No, because guess what? We don't have a team. There are no USFL teams. There's no West Coast representation. So there's not really much of an incentive to really put into marketing here. The only time I saw anything was when Tyree Robinson, who was the safety who played for the Stallions, what happened to be from my area, is from the San Diego area. He came on one of the local stations and said, yeah, I won this big game and we won the USFL championship. And that was after the fact, nothing about it in the lead up of that. Of course, never heard anything about it whatsoever. So yes, while marketing, I think, will help in terms of being able to know where to put it, the problem is that it's still limited to a certain region, a certain section of the United States. It's still that belt. It's still the Southern belt and it's the East Coast. So that's the only thing I'm wondering about is, like, at some point they're going to have to, look into expansion, which I know they're not looking into right now. That's kind of later on down the road, but that's still a limiting factor in my book, is that there's not really a lot of regional diversity in that. So I don't know if it would really make a difference out here. I mean, maybe some people would follow it, football junkies, obviously. But other than that, there's not really without an entity to really kind of latch themselves onto, at least for people out here. I don't know, for example, if that would really improve anything.
Van, you're a football nut. I mean, did you fly to DC to kind of be a part of the whole like secret like handshake being great? I mean, what did you make of the USFL this season? I mean, just from like you were going to go to the MLFB championship game. I mean, you love all this stuff. Like, what did you make of USFL?
Well, I actually enjoyed it. But of course, as you said, I'm Mr. Dragon fanatic. Having Mike Riley and having 7 former 2020 Dragons on the team, that's what lured me back there. But then I watched every game either live or through replay, through streaming. I thought it was a good product. I just was really disappointed that they never tried to reach out to other people. And what Andy came up with, I use the term all the time with the XFL, it's East Coast bias. The world doesn't exist too much west of the Mississippi River. I mean, maybe Houston, and it's been a problem. I mean, look at right now. They have 8 teams. They decided to market 25% of them. Which ones did they take? They took St. Louis, which was really low-hanging fruit, and then they went after the DC market. I've got to believe in the next 3 to 4 weeks, though, they've got to go ahead and engage these other 6 markets and go with it. But the USFL, they're making noise, they're doing signings and stuff, and they're trying to keep their name in the media. But seriously, they've just got to come out and market it. Even they don't market it as football, market it as a television show out here on the West Coast.
I just the stubbornness that has gone along with that league, I will never understand. I know I have been well recorded with my thoughts on that, but like when I have Mark Drumheller on, that's the head of gambling and fantasy content for Yahoo Sports, and he's like, I've written about the USFL every week. I have not had one person ever reach out to me in the entire time. And this was like, I think week like 8 or 9 of the season. It was pretty late when I had him on. I'm like, that's remarkable to me. That's just remarkable to me that we have, I'm dumb Reed. Like who cares? Like I'm bitching and moaning about this. But like, you're Yahoo Sports. Like, you didn't have anyone reach out to you the entire season and be like, hey, let's share your content. Like, let's help provide you analytics and numbers to help drive your fantasy stuff. It's just remarkable to me. Andy, any thoughts? Edmonton's strong. I believe they're double over now over the Red Blacks here during the game. Any thoughts on what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's notorious that we haven't had much amicability in terms of getting anyone to work with us on that side. And that kind of was apparent to us going down there. Obviously, you and I being there, all three of us, being down there in person, we saw it firsthand. There just didn't seem to be a lot of reach out in terms of like getting any sort of media availability or any sort of like trying to set up, as you mentioned, analytics, any sort of material content whatsoever. It's just like you had to kind of do it all on your own, which, I mean, there are a lot of passionate people who clearly want to do that, but you also have to have some give and take. You have to have people who are willing to work with those individuals, because at the end of the day, getting the word out about your product is probably one of the most important things to do if you want to continue marketing it and make sure it survives, especially in year one. But it didn't seem like it gave off that impression. And based on the contacts that you had, the contacts that I had, the people that we talked to, it never seemed to materialize in the way that we think it should have. So maybe that changes in year two. I don't know, but it was just very odd that it wasn't more proactive in trying to get it out, especially considering how much of a financial investment and ordeal this is. Hub or not, it's still a lot of money that went down the Fox tubes.
I had
Andrew.
Van, go for it.
Okay, Andrew, why don't you share the story of our Sunday night at the Southern Kitchen and explain to the world what we encountered just sitting there hanging out? The employees of the league searched us out and came and talked to us.
Yeah, they did. Some of the people in the broadcast crew came out and actually spoke to us, and also a couple of the players who were supposed to play in that game on that. The game that got postponed. Yeah, the one that we got informed about from one of the Canberra crew that we were just standing next to and happened to look over at him, and he looks at us. He goes, "Yeah, this game's postponed." And we're like, "I'm sorry." He's like, "This is going to be postponed. The weather's going to be rolling in soon." So that's when I sent out the message to the group and said and reported it. But yeah, no, Van's right. We had people come over to us at our table and talk to us because we were there, because we had come all that way to be able to talk about, engage in, and be involved with the league. And I don't know how many opportunities they had to do that throughout that Sunday, because obviously Sunday was not Saturday. It was very much a more sparse operation as far as fan attendance. But meanwhile, me and Van were there the entire time, front row. Van going on about blue suede shoes, Shea Patterson, poor guy. But it was, it was interesting that I've never had such close contact with people, even though there was no setup or anything of that nature. There was no, pre-agreed upon sort of availability. It was just the people who had been working at the stadium that day. So I thought it was just interesting, but I'm glad we got that exposure. But again, it was them individually coming up to us, not the league reaching out to us in any way, shape, or form.
I had an interesting. Darren Bombing was on last week. Darren is a Winnipeg sports reporter, covers obviously the Blue Bombers and the Jets. He does a weekly show now, Bonfire Sports. They do a Winnipeg pregame show and a midweek show, and they do a call-in show at the end. And I had an interesting discussion with him, and he said, it's not up to the CFL plays the games. Like that's the involvement they need to have in this. Like they play the games, we cover the games. I just, Darren's been in this a long time, and obviously, wealth of knowledge more than I have. Is I'm just a wedding videographer that does this for fun. But it was just an interesting take, and it kind of took me back. Because here I am, kind of bitching and moaning all the time about damn it, I want all this stuff. He said, CFL plays the games. Like what else you want them to do? Like they give us the sport to cover. We're able to cover it. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting, that it was more of the privilege of being able to talk about the CFL than like the CFL really needs to come at us and provide us more stuff. Darren Bombing specifically was saying that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Van, we're getting close to CFL kickoff here. We'll talk a little BC Lions before we go. I want to know Van's thoughts before I kick him off on the Vegas Here you've bought tickets to everything. You're going to be the big season ticket holder again, but like Vegas, XFL choosing Vegas over any of the other cities that they have. I want to get your thoughts on that before I let you go.
Well, I've actually been trying to do some research that when I get some answers back, I was going to share it with you folks. It's my understanding that Allegiant has personal seat licenses or PSLs rather than the Raiders having PSLs. So like in Lumen Field here in Seattle, the Seahawks have personal seat licenses that guarantee the seats for just Seahawks games. So if you've got go to a Sounders game or an OL Reign, which is the women's soccer league up here, or anybody else, they've got a different season ticket priority, different matrix, different seats that are open. It's my understanding that when Allegiant was built, somehow there's a really deep PSL down there, that the optics of it would be is if they can't negotiate through those with the casinos and everybody else that holds all those lower bowl PSLs, they'd basically be only able to sell seats in the upper bowl. Now, you talk about horrible optics in Birmingham of just a few people in there. How about having nobody in the lower bowl except for a few drunks from the casinos and all the new season ticket holders and all the walk-up fans in the upper bowl?
Whatever is happening in Vegas is not great. I don't know if Vegas is this hill we need to die on to be able to have an XFL franchise there at least year one. Very odd to me.
I agree. I don't know. Back to your question about I can keep a secret. Yes, I was in fact invited to the DC event, but I knew that Laura Rutledge from ESPN was going to be broadcasting the Seahawks game last night. And I just couldn't make it happen to get back in time for the game. And I wanted to catch up with Laura, which I was able to do last night. She was the hostess of the town hall in Arlington. And it was just, I'd rather see live football than go to a meet and greet. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures leaked of it, Reed, but it should remind you of Elysian Fields.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is good. The game is winding down. I want to do a little CFL talk before we get out of here. We'll actually pre the show a little bit. I'm going to kick Van off. Thank you so much for your time, Van, and insights as always. I was going to wait for that. Sorry. I waited for him to say goodbye, and then I cut him off anyway. If anyone would like to call in any last minute, thoughts about, BC Roughriders tonight, anything else for the weekend. I know Kyle had posted earlier, Hamilton is Hamilton at Montreal tomorrow. Thoughts on that matchup? Matt Schultz, right? Probably getting the start again for Montreal. I don't know. I would like to see Montreal roll. What do you think about that? And then we'll talk about BC.
I mean, it could happen. I mean, obviously that was a outstanding victory they had last week. And the fact that their defensive line played so well, they just hassled Zach Collaros all night. I cannot believe how well they played against that offensive line. It was a tremendous effort by that unit. As far as their offense, I mean, Trevor Harris is kind of hot and cold. Sometimes he's really on, sometimes he's not. I think their offense is still kind of a work in progress. I mean, the Willie Steinbeck injury really hurt them at the beginning of this year. And I think that kind of just killed any momentum they had as far as like continuing to have any success in the run game. They have a great receiving core. I'll see what kind of consistency they can have on offense. The big question again is, can they stay disciplined? As Danny Machocha was banging the table about as far as their team. They managed to fix it last week a little bit, but again, they continue to be a disciplined football team and not commit so many penalties. That's the question. But I'll tell you what, Reed, if you would like, I can actually share my take that I had this morning that I shared on the group handle. So as far as Hamilton goes, and I we'll see how this goes, but in my opinion, if Matt Schultz plays the rest of the season, if he is the starter for the rest of the way, I think Hamilton wins the East. I really liked what I saw from him in that Toronto game last week. I think he can be more steady. I think he can be someone who doesn't commit errant turnovers. All due respect to Dane Evans, the guy has just been a turnover machine the entire season, and it's just killed Hamilton in the fourth quarter. And last week they scored 17 points in the fourth quarter. They got over the huge curse that they had in the fourth quarters this year. They finally came up big when it needed to happen in the final frame. So, in my opinion, if that happens, if they're able to continue to be smart, if they're able to not just shoot themselves in the foot, because I think this team has a ton of talent. I really do. And I think they have they're plenty fine on both sides of the ball. I really do believe that Hamilton is going to win the East. So in my opinion, I actually think they're going to come out locked and loaded and ready tomorrow against Montreal.
I don't know what Hamilton's like identity is right now. They were, 2-time Grey Cup losing, they come out this year. We had the, Mazzoli, Evans, what do we want? We trade Mazzoli. Okay. That's, and then the Marino thing, and that was horrible. And, I thought that Mazzoli looked really good, and some of the statements and everything he made about that. But, now we have Dan Evans and he's not it. Like, I thought they were so close. They feel further away than they ever have from anything that they've had the last 2 seasons. I don't know where meanwhile, you have Montreal and Gary Stern and everything. I mean, they're killing it right now. I mean, I think Montreal is Canada's team. I'll call them right now. I mean, at least it's Twitter's team. I'll give Gary Stern that the Montreal Outlets are CFL Twitter's team right now. Would you disagree?
I mean, maybe for this week. I'm not sure about after tomorrow, but I think Gary Stern is obviously a expert at stirring the crowd up. He has been excellent at this whole thing as far as like getting people engaged in the product, getting people engaged at the games, for better or worse, as far as like what he says in terms of some inflammatory things as far as what his team's going to do to the other team. I love it, but I also know that it can be a little bit distracting, and I think it's going to become continue to be a factor throughout the season, and we're going to see what happens as far as what he says is going to be backed up on the field. I don't know. And I think that's something to think about going forward. But again, look, Montreal has every opportunity to turn their season around now. Like, now's the chance, because this division has been putrid. It's not been good. And I think there's an opportunity to win there. I mean, Ottawa had a chance coming into the night. They're getting absolutely shellacked by Edmonton. So now they're probably going to continue drifting further away. And their season, unfortunately, looks like it's going to be lost just to a cavalcade of injuries and unfortunate mistakes and bad timing plays in the fourth quarter. So I think for Montreal, absolutely, this is a chance for them to do it. Again, I don't really feel great about them as far as their discipline and as far as the vibe that's going on with that team outside of their one victory last week. But I could be wrong. Maybe suddenly maybe that locker room is all, Machocha fanboys. So
It took one. Sometimes it looks like we have someone trying to call in, and maybe they're trying to get the phone's moving. Maybe we're trying to get seated there. Frisco Fighters, if you want to call. I got to see who it is. It can't be. I don't want to have any of my enemies calling into the show trying to confront me on there. But I think Ottawa's done. I mean, they're out. Montreal, I don't know. Argos, Harris is out. I mean, the East is really scary right now, and on the West, BC is really firing. I was happy to see the victory last week against Calgary. Like, I think you need more parity in the league. We've had people on in the past talking about that with the CFL, and I mean, the East is just horrendous. And I mean, whoever wins out of that, God forbid if it's Winnipeg again, and it's Winnipeg versus a 6 and whatever Hamilton. I don't know. I don't like that. Those optics going into the third Grey Cup. Yeah, no, I mean, the West playoff picture is going to be a knife fight. I mean, it's going to be BC. It's going to be presumably Calgary, and that's the thing. Saskatchewan is now going to be on their heels. I mean, if I'm not going to say anything about tonight, but like, if for whatever reason Saskatchewan wins or they start to get some momentum again, like, that's kind of a scary proposition for Calgary, because they're not too far away behind them. And I think that's something to consider as well. As far as BC goes, I mean, look, they have the most prolific offense in the league. They're scoring almost 37 points a game. And I think for them, it's all confidence. It really is. I think it's all confidence because of how Rourke is playing and how they get behind Rourke. And I think that's something that they can carry with them even into the playoffs. Now, I think, Winnipeg, they are the crown jewel. They are the champions. They're the team that everyone wants to beat. The team that everyone wants to be. They are sound. They're proficient. They're disciplined. Mike O'Shea does a fantastic job of having an identity with that team. There's no mystery about them whatsoever. So, I mean, what I was wondering is, are we going to see a team like, for example, either Calgary or Saskatchewan cross over into the East playoff picture? And then are they going to end up possibly taking that spot? Because that would be really interesting if you have an all West
playoff picture as far as the Grey Cup. That would be really interesting.
I tell you, I think my schedule will work out. I don't think I have as many late season weddings this year. I will fly. I'm going to go to that, West Division final, BC. I mean, right, presumably makes the late run, but I really feel like I'm going to be there for that. I think that's really important, just for BC and kind of getting the momentum back. Not my appearance being there, but I just think it's very exciting times. It's very exciting times for the Lions. I want to be a part of that. God forbid Winnipeg and whatever we get to the Grey Cup and all that stuff. But I think maybe even just as a fan, go to that game, kind of hop in there. Whether BC, it would be Winnipeg hosting, right? If they're depending on how all the standings work out. But I do think I'm going to be there for that.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, I mean, both teams have one loss. Now, Winnipeg has played a couple more games, obviously, so they have that leg up, and BC still has to win those 2 games left. But, I mean, they both only have one loss. So, I mean, if BC somehow hosted the West Final, that would be absolutely that'd be wild. It would be absolutely wild that happened. I personally don't believe it's going to happen. I think Winnipeg's going to continue doing their business. What's going to be interesting is they don't play each other much until way later in the season, like week 18 and week 21. I was looking at, week 19. Winnipeg goes back to BC in week 19, and then week 21 they play again. But at that point, that might be decided. So it might be. Yeah, it might be just another hosted Winnipeg final. So you would be in Manitoba, and you would be in was it LG Field? I think is the name of the venue.
IG Field.
IG Field. Yes.
What is the week of? Okay, so the Eastern Final is November 13th. When is that? When is that week 21? The Winnipeg and BC game.
That I think that might be. I want to say Halloween weekend. So 29, 30th, damn. I believe. I have to double check, but I think that would be the case.
That's tough.
If I'm looking at
the CFL games never work out right. It's always the Rep Hamilton, the Ottawa, Saskatchewan, the Calgary. I don't know where that BC game is in there. This is a great podcast. BC at Edmonton on October 21st. Anyway, I got to get up there. I got to get up to BC. I got to get up to BC Place. We denied at the border last year and have never lived it down.
Mm-hmm. It looks like it'd be October 28th, Friday. So going into the Halloween holiday. So yeah, that would be. Mm-hmm.
That's at Winnipeg though. Yeah, you said Winnipeg was at BC one of the games.
Oh, week 19. Sorry. Yes. That's a couple weeks before. That is the Saturday, October 15th.
I have a wedding that day. There you go.
Oh.
Anyone else? Any last questions, comments? I'll ride this out till the top of the hour, and then they always Milton, all them will talk for a minute before. I don't think we're missing anything right now. But what do I say? BC against Montreal. If it was BC against Montreal in the Grey Cup, I wanted to, and I have to look at my calendar too. Because Montreal's coming to BC soon, and I thought, or one way or the other, and I thought we need to have Amar Doman arm wrestle Gary Stern,
and
then the loser has to eat the poutine. Like I was gonna pitch that to Matt Baker. I was gonna send him an email and say, I think that would legitimately generate if they think that Cow in Calgary, the man in the cow suit, if you think that's gonna draw ratings, I think Amar Doman arm wrestling Gary Stern for poutine is gonna be. What do you think of that pitch?
I'm sure that would go viral. No doubt about it. I'm sure that would absolutely go viral.
I had someone tweeted me today that we should legitimately have a roundtable with Amar Doman, Victor Cui, and Gary Stern hosted by me. And I said, I'm absolutely pitching that next week. I could do that. We could do that.
I think so. Yeah, we could take him.
But I think that would be fascinating to get Amar Doman, Victor Cui, and I have no saliva anymore. I'm confused. Victor Cui and Gary Stern. If you had all three of them on the round table, I think that would be a tremendously interesting listen. I think that would be fascinating.
Absolutely. I think those are the three of maybe the top 4 or 5 owners you'd want to hear from maybe at this time. I think they would all be. It'd be really interesting to just hear their different ideas about the game, the way they run their franchises, and kind of what they would do as far as, the longevity of the league and all that. That would be really cool.
Kyle wants me to get Kate Burness on. I have probably emailed Kate 7 or 8 times over the last year and a half. You don't want to be stalker, right? I can't be emailing you all the time, but I have put in work with Kate. If you want to tweet at Kate, I've emailed Kate through her website. I've emailed Kate to her TSN email, or it would be her TSN email. I've tried with Kate Burness. I've really tried. Or same with her and Dunnigan. Dunnigan is a tough one. I've told Milt to reach out to Dunnigan for me. I've told Dave Sanchez to reach out to Dunnigan for me. He's a tough one too. I thought having Milt Stiegel on making fun of Dunnigan's beard would have maybe got me a little bit because I tweeted about that and him calling him ugly and whatever, but that didn't get it. So any other guests we need to get on the show, Andy?
One of the other owners. Can we get Larry Tannenbaum on here? That's what I was gonna say.
If Dunk can't get Tannenbaum, then I don't know about that. Did you see my my back and forth with the 3 Down guys about them and calling them anti-American?
I mean, when hasn't that happened? Is this like the 3rd or 4th time I feel like we've had this discussion, or at least you've had a discussion with him out in an open forum?
Well, it just to me, Philip says who's Kate? Kate is the lead host of the TSN panel that does the halftime show. They do the pregame show. They do on the location stuff. Hodge was on one of the radio stations. This was last week or early this week, talking about, because it's come up that the ratings are better, right, this year in America and the CFL a little bit. I mean, it's still, it's like 170,000 viewers, but considering that ESPN, they don't advertise the CFL at all, it's pretty good ratings. And Hodge was like, yeah, ESPN, they should pay more money. They should pony up. Like, let's inject some lifeblood into the CFL. Like, someone in the States need to do that. I said, you guys are the biggest, like, we're like pro Canada. We don't need anybody. Like, we don't, we hate the XFL. We hate, we're 3 Down Nation. We do all that. Like, we don't need anybody else. And then here you are, like, demanding the ESPN to like pony up to pay more money for the CFL. Like, that was just astounding to me. I don't disagree with the message at all. I think ESPN should pay more money. I mean, you see the ratings MLS is getting and, hockey and everything else, but the 3 Down would be like the voice of American ESPN needs to pay up more money to support our league. I just thought was astounding.
Yeah, pretty wild coming from that point of view. I think it's something that could be discussed in the future. But again, this is are you going to be able to get a viable market to be able to invest in this? And that's something that, I mean, we've got some data on, but I don't know. Look, all I know is that there's been at least more of a push towards that in recent memory. And that's because guess what? There was a collaboration between an American league and a Canadian league, like that was something that got people on board and to talk about it and finally pay attention to the CFL for the first time in their entire lives. So I don't know as far as like rights fees or what kinds of like broadcast deal they would have with them. I mean, if they want to try, like, first of all, I mean, maybe they can try and bring more games to ESPN's platform, not just ESPN Plus, but maybe, I don't know, 2 or News or whatever, because we don't even get all the games on the regular cable channels. We just get them on, some of them we do, but not all of them. So that has to be the first starting point is, can you get all of the games readily available on these networks? Can you get like a deal on ESPN2 or for whatever example? And look, maybe they've run the numbers and said, well, there's actually this other program we have that's just more important during this time. So, and obviously during college football season, forget it. Like, you're not going to get anybody on ESPN2 on a Saturday night, maybe even a Friday night, that's going to be able to be replaced by Canadian football. You're going to have college football. So
I just wish they could get it better. I'm just looking at my phone here. I'm trying to figure out when the games come on. I just wish that this ESPN Plus thing is just killer. I mean, I have it, but a lot of people, it's just the issue. It's on ESPN News. Like, for me to watch some of the CFL games, I got to have ESPN Plus and YouTube TV. And it's like, you got to sync them and move them on. Like, but I just can't imagine that they can't figure out a time slot Thursday nights on ESPN2 where, airing bowling or cornhole or whatever. And anything else? It's always something. Any other thoughts, comments? I mean, I'm having fun. We spiked a little bit in viewership here towards the end. Any other comments before we get out of here? Andy, I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, as always. I mean, look, again, like you said about the ESPN Plus thing, it's a matter of, can you get people to watch on, say, a Friday night, for example? And I think Friday night is like, you can dominate that spot, honestly. Now, do a lot of people want to watch stuff on Friday night? Not necessarily, but again, it depends on also what times those Thursday night games are going on. Again, during the summer, there's nothing, but during, the fall, that's obviously competition. I mean, we don't have a game we don't have a game on Thursday night this week for the CFL. I'm going to presume because of the preseason action that we got. So that's, if preseason games are already starting to, absorb the attention of the masses, then I don't know how you're going to be able to pitch that. So I think either it's going to be Friday nights, I guess sometimes Saturday, but again, like I said, most people in the States are going to be paying attention to college football. So it really depends. There has to be some sort of niche audience, but they clearly are there. People are watching the product, but again, I think that's more people who are watching either certain teams or certain products like Nathan Rourke, like an individual that is really making headway. And quite frankly, the CFL just needs more people like that.
The fact that the less than meaningless, because it's like the bonus preseason game of the Raiders at versus Jacksonville at home of the USFL championship, that got more viewership than like the Stanley Cup Finals average is just like astounding to me as someone that watched a good portion of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Pitch to you, just while we're talking Canton, everything else before we go. USFL, we got the sweetheart deal in Birmingham, all of that. I think, and I said this in the group chat, I think the USFL should play at Canton all the time. I think you could do a 5-year deal there. I wouldn't even worry about moving teams into markets. I would say we're going to play. If you come anytime, if you come to the to the Pro Football Hall of Fame anytime between April and July, we're playing games. You have one game a day. Even you hit them, say, come watch a football game. Come watch the future NFL stars. We're signing 50 guys, to the thing. But what do you think about USFL like permanently at least having half their hubs there in Canton?
A hub in Canton. The stadium is an appropriate size if you get people to go in there. So that's part of it. It's smaller than Protective Stadium and Legion Field for one. Look, I think the biggest thing that had going for it in that playoffs was that there was pageantry around it as far as this is the history of football. Look at this. This is all the people who've come through here and all the greatness that's ever happened on this field and other fields and all that, the state of Ohio being a state of football, which it very much is. I wouldn't mind that if there's easy transportation back and forth out of that venue. That's the other thing, because that was the thing that I got on about Birmingham was the lack of ease of getting out of the Birmingham airport to other hubs. So if that's the case, then sure. What if that was like, for example, maybe just starting out as like the second hub? We were discussing that the other day. I think I can't remember, someone in our thread that was asking or just threw out there said, hey, who do you think the second hub would be? I think it was Sam, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I immediately said Philly, because I'm like, well, the Philly was just in the Philadelphia Stars are a recognizable brand in the USFL, subspace, and they went to the championship game. They've been very successful even in the past. But, I wouldn't mind that. I think that'd be a great idea. And I think, again, there would be a lot of more just respectability and, again, like I said, pageantry to that whole pick. So I kind of agree with you on that one. I actually would, if that was like the second hub, that would actually not be a bad idea.
When the USFL championship game, I worked that whole weekend. That's 4 weddings the weekend of the USFL championship game. I had so many people tweeting me like, why aren't you talking about the attendance, Reed? Like they have packed, like, what do you, I'm glad after 13 weeks of national exposure on Fox and NBC, we were able to get 17,000 people. I'm going to say it on here because I didn't tweet it, and I really wanted to tweet this. We had Anthony Becht on throwing out the first pitch for the St. Louis Cardinals game, and there's like nobody at the game. It's like the Cardinals game. Like there's nobody there. And I so wanted to tweet, look at that. This is the first step to the Alt Football Super League. We have Anthony Becht appearing at a USFL game. And everyone was like, you can't tweet that. So I didn't tweet that. But here you go. If you've made it an hour and 33 minutes into the live stream, here you get that. I thought that was a pretty funny tweet.
I think the best part is I don't think it would have even been the USFL people. I think it would have been the Cardinals fans. You would have drawn an entirely different sport of people coming after you and jumping down your throat. That's the best part about it. I don't even think it'd be the football fans.
I literally have no filter. Like my wife's like, this is why I love you. But I have no filter at all. Like people get so mad. I'm like, it's just funny. Like it's funny. And when the XFL plays and they don't have anyone, like we'll talk about it too, but it's never not funny to talk about the USFL, like not having fans in the stands. Like I don't think it will ever not be funny to comment about that.
Yeah, I think it's just a point that's going to continue being driven into the ground, no matter where it is, what time it is.
So, I'm watching we got the panel here. We're wrapping up. We have Dave Naylor's on. Pitch tease. Naylor's going to be on the show next week. We'll be talking lots of CFL stuff, I'm sure. We had Farhan on this week. If you guys missed the episode, so far, check that out this weekend. Naylor's going to be on, and then I have hang on, where is my? I have Jake Russell also coming on from the Washington Post. So he's going to be talking a lot of XFL stuff as well. So we should have lots of CFL. And I want to get Naylor's thoughts on the USFL signings to the NFL as well. But we're going to have Naylor on the show next week. I think I have Jake Russell. And then I have another surprise guest, CFL guest I'll be posting as well. So, but it should be good. I'm excited. Are you excited to get Naylor back on the Markcast, Andy?
It's been a long time. Yeah, I always love to hear Naylor. You get a lot of Farhan. Obviously, Farhan is, I would say, certified Markcast. I don't know how you would say, like a gold member, because he comes on a lot and he's been very, very helpful. But Naylor's always great too. He's wonderful. He has a really unique perspective, and I always like to get him on the show. So I can't wait to have him on again.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Farhan, taking the time. And Nail, it should be a good show. Lots of stuff coming up in the world of all this stuff. We'll wrap up here. Andy, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Other than, I guess, my Twitter. But the only other thing I wanted to say is I'm very excited because next month I'm going to be going to a game in our brand new stadium here in San Diego, the Snapdragon Stadium, which I'm going to scout out and kind of take inventory of, because I really believe that at some point, if all goes well in my lifetime, that maybe there'll be maybe a pro football team down here again. And I think that is absolutely a fantastic venue. So I'm going to take inventory, check it out, see what goes on. Tickets are already going out like crazy for the team here, the college team, even the women's soccer team that's here. They're already starting to sell out tickets. So I'm going to be looking at that in the next month or two, going to some games and checking it out. But I'm really excited just to have some semblance of football to go to again in San Diego. So
yeah, it should be good. I think XFL, I should have went to San Diego over Vegas. I think that would have maybe been a little bit better of a situation. Flights to San Diego to Dallas aren't much different than Vegas to Vegas to Dallas. But I really appreciate everyone coming on. I just thought this would be fun tonight. I don't have a lot of time to do the pregame shows. Especially Fridays, just because I don't like to kind of like double up on like we're already having the episodes come out. But I thought this was good. I thought it was a slower news week. I did my best to kind of get Farhan on, and then Nathan with the St. Louis Business Journal, and Steve over with Breakaway Data on there. So I thought like a good enough show. We had 6 people last week, so I thought, well, we'll make it up by the live stream tonight. I like to give a lot of content out there, but appreciate this. If you guys like this, like and subscribe. Happy to do it. But yeah, Andy missed the story at the top of the show where the whole point of doing the live stream tonight was Dorothy was going to be out of town for one of her friend's weddings. Found out yesterday morning that the friend got stood up by her fiance the day before the wedding after they had been engaged for 2+ years, rescheduled their wedding twice during COVID. So Dorothy's inside. We're going to be watching the CFL game here coming up. But yeah, any reactions to that, Andy, before we go?
I'm going to have a headache thinking about that. Oh my God. Wow. I shouldn't be laughing because that's awful, but unbelievable. That's I don't know if I have words for that. That's unbelievable. I can't, but that's a heck of a way to start and end the show though, Reed.
Wow. We had, and I obviously wasn't filming it. We had a couple, we had one this year that they broke up about a week and a half before the wedding, destination wedding up in the San Juan Islands. And then I had a couple years ago, my wife and I were actually standing in line to get our marriage certificate. And I got an email that my wedding, it was like a Wednesday, that my wedding that Saturday, that they were calling it off as well. The groom was walking away. So it does happen. We don't get a lot of cancellations. I've shot 400+ weddings at this point in my life. And so we have a pretty good record. And in terms of divorce rates, incredibly low too with a lot of the couples that we have. But always interesting to see that. So anyway, I see the drones coming into Mosaic. We're pitching the show. Andy, everyone, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to roll the banner here, and thank you guys all so much again. We good, Andy?
Yes, sir.
All right. How do I do this? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.